Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for a second public talk about poetic technologist. And we will have one more tomorrow with Michael Hudson. And then we will have a practical workshops that James Schneider is running now with other DGI members in St. Vincent and Grenadines. And I'm giving floor to James, who will chair this discussion.
Hi there. Hello. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and welcome wherever you are in the world. Tonight promises, or tonight, this morning, this afternoon, in the middle of the night, wherever you are, promises to be a great and challenging conversation as we contemplate the social collapse which is running towards us, how at the moment we're only doing tinkering around the edges, which won't do anything about it, and we try to find practical ways forward so that we don't meet that collapse, or we can live better amongst it. And we're very lucky tonight to be joined by two excellent speakers who will each speak to you for 10 or so minutes, make presentations about their work before a discussion between them and questions from you in the audience. So please do put your questions in the chat, and through some magical means they will come to me and I'll be able to put some of them to our two great speakers. So I'm delighted to introduce Ilona Otto, who's Professor of Societal Impacts of Climate Change at the University of Graz, and Steve Keen, the economist and author made famous, amongst other things, for predicting the 2008 financial crisis, who I think his latest position, after many, many positions, is at the University of Amsterdam. And so without further ado, I will ask Ilona to please kick us off.
Yeah, thank you, James, for the introduction. And it's an honor to be here. And I will start with a few slides as we talked. So just to kind of to introduce us to the theme, I will now try to share my screen. Okay, so you should see my slides.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I will talk a bit about my work on social tipping dynamics, but also about like the recent work about something what you may call a social collapse. Yeah, so this is like the pathway that took me there. So in my work in the past, I did quite a lot of research about the impacts of climate change and adaptation. And something what we may conclude that it's not the future, it's happening right now. So every year we observe more and more climate extremes, and more people are suffering, people are dying here now. And it's kind of known that if we continue on this emission pathway that we are currently on, the atmosphere will get warmer, and if we get towards the end of the century to something around 4 degrees and more, it's also relatively clear that it's beyond our capacity to adapt to such a system. Yes, so it's also something what we should. What's important that there are also the limits to adaptation, and we can well, of course, no, we don't know everything, but according to what I know, what also other scientists are saying, if you talk about those higher degrees of global warming, maybe no, it's not that there won't be people on Earth, but it's also what we learned, that it will be like a completely different human-nature interactions. Yes, so it will be like the end of the world as we know it in terms of nature-human interactions. And it's not only about direct impacts, but if you think of so-called cascading climate impacts or risks, yes, so it's what we observe also right now, that climate change impact cascade from areas that are far away to other areas through international trade networks, through finance and business networks, but also to stability and conflict, so migration. So again, this is something what is happening, and it's it shows also how our world is interconnected, and those impacts far away cascade also to regions that you might think that they are not so much exposed to climate change impacts. But in order to avoid those higher global warming level that you see on this figure, like so this is this kind of business as usual pathway, assuming a world that it will be about 4 degrees warmer at the end of the century, and we don't want to get there. So in order to avoid those higher degrees of global warming, we need to get on this blue emission pathway that is kind of on the bottom, and it looks quite incredible. Yes, so if you look at this black curve that shows the historical changes in CO2 emissions globally, and then you look at this blue curve that we need to get to stabilize the climate below 2 degrees. We are talking about exponential level of social change. Also, many changes in human behavior and lifestyles. So about 70% of all emissions, so that's this yellow area, is related actually to behavior and lifestyle choices. But of course, I don't also want to say that it's all up to individuals, because a lot what we do depends on infrastructure, also on the social structure. So a lot of emissions kind of are related to the kind of infrastructure type of structures like we are living in. So that's this kind of yellow, darker yellow area. And also, of course, in agriculture, forestry, and land use. Currently, there are sources of emissions, but if you think we need to get to below 2 degrees, they like land use needs to become the emission sink. Yes? So we have to absorb carbon in the soils, in vegetation. And at the same time, we also need land to produce renewable energy, and also for human settlements and for biodiversity protection. So there are all those challenges, and those kind of ambitious scenarios, they are not possible without technological CO2 removal. So it's also interesting that those technologies don't really exist there yet at the scale, but you will not get those lower emission scenarios without technological CO2 removal. So yeah, it's not optimistic, but a few years ago I ran a global survey with various experts from academia and outside academia, and they believed at that time that it's possible to get on this blue curve, that we can limit the global warming below 2 degrees. And that time they suggested all kinds of ideas, which I kind of grouped to something what I call like 6 social tipping elements, or candidates for social tipping elements that could bring this rapid change that is needed and lower global CO2 emissions. That time, according to the experts, so you see this publication was published in 2020. The experts believed that it was crucial to remove fossil fuel subsidies and to divest for fossil fuel assets. So like the financial markets was one of those social tipping elements. Then like information systems, so having like a global system disclosing CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. Also the energy production storage system was important, and here exactly the removal of fossil fuel subsidies and also the centralized energy generation. Human settlements, and here carbon neutral cities. Education system and climate education, and also the system of norms and values. And the experts at that time believed that recognizing the moral implications of fossil fuel, or the immoral character of fossil fuel, was very important, was one of those kind of social tipping elements. And that time, the experts believed that we do have the technology, the knowledge to lower the emissions, and kind of restructure our social systems. And these were the areas that suggest that it's necessary to intervene to release those social tipping dynamics. But however, at the same time, like we are now in 2025, and just a few weeks after the COP30 conference in Belém in Brazil, and there's still no global political agreement on the emissions, and the emissions stabilized, so they are not increasing as sharply as in the past, but still, like we are about 1%, of the global emissions still are kind of on the 1% rise. They are still not decreasing, and there are like now I don't want to be like completely pessimistic, but because like there are many good things happening, and even in Austria, where I'm based, there are so many inspirational stories that are happening, and kind of in the way how people live, and in shared housing, and also in renewable energy expansion, also in social norms. I also see it among students that they travel less, or they buy like a lot of secondhand, or just they buy less, or people make like many things themselves, or they also share, and so on. So I don't want to sound completely negative. I think there's like a lot of positive changes happening. However, at the same time, on this kind of like more global level, there are some concerns, and this is a figure that was published just a few weeks ago. It was led by Johan Rockström, but I was one of the co-authors, where we try to kind of, we try to boil down this pressure, those ideas that are circulating, to kind of emphasize that if we want to reach net zero by the mid-century, it's necessary to reduce emissions, but also some probably overshoot, CO2 overshoot will be necessary. But it's still, at this point of time, it's still possible to avoid this kind of like very destructive climate change that is ahead of us. However, if we don't act now, in about 5 years, we'll be in this kind of what we call like critical juncture, that most of likely, in some way there won't be a business as usual anymore, but the world will get to this area what we call unmanageable overshoot, where we will talk about like more and more of social unrest, also socioeconomic destabilization, and kind of failure of national states to maintain their functions. Yeah, so probably like because of massive pressure, also migration and climate extremes. Like for instance, healthcare system will not be in many areas, like you will not be able to maintain the healthcare system, education system, also like some sort of like security, like national security system, and so on. And this is something what brought me to this discussion here today. And I think maybe it's also time to talk about how to prepare for it. And also, we hear those stories that the very rich people, they are building their bunkers, and they are trying to like even like build like independent systems on some islands and so on. But the question would be how to make this sort of whatever you call by social collapse as something what can work for regular people. And maybe something what we could also think about as some sort of like a degrowth scenario, and how to bring people through this phase. I will pause here. I'm really looking forward to hear what Steve will talk about. But anyhow, it's I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilona. Steve, Ilona mentioned 2030, and I think that date is important for you too. As Ilona was talking about the relation between ecological and social dynamics, including collapse. I think you'll talk about economic ones. Let me pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not a climate scientist. I'm an economist, obviously, and I've focused on what the economists have written about climate change. And given that the title of this talk is Tinkering about climate change, I want to point out that the reason we're tinkering, not actually doing anything serious about climate change, can be slated back to economists. Now, that might look like the case when I show, if I'm sharing my screen now, if you can put my screen up there. Thank you. Okay, this is a recent paper which claimed that if we continued on the trajectory we are right now, we'll have a GDP in 2050, which is 26 years away when this paper was written, 19% smaller. Now that sounds like a large fall, but in fact, what that means for economists is that that's going to mean the rate of economic growth, global rate of economic growth, falls by 0.8%. Of what 0.8%. Now, that is meaning that still means that economic growth, according to economists, is going to continue to be positive because the global rate of economic growth is of the order of 3%. So they're saying rather than growing at 3% per annum, we're going to grow at 2.2% per annum. So it's not the reason, and the way you work this out, it's actually quite a simple formula. So pardon me whacking an equation in here, because you just take the damages they're talking about as a fraction. So this is a 19% reduction. And to take the log of 1 minus that damage, that's the log of 0.81, and divide it by the number of years in the future that the economists are saying is going to happen, that works out to a 0.8% fall in the rate of economic growth, which would reduce living standards somewhat, but it's not a crisis. Now, we are in a crisis. And the reason we are is partly because economists have told us all we have to do is tinker, because they have made up their own numbers about global warming and the impact it'll have on the economy. They are completely fictional, and they did not use the work of scientists to put this information together. So what economists are predicting is that global warming is going to have a minor impact upon society and economic damages, and it's very important to make sure we don't spend too much money and devote too many resources to reducing what's going to be a minor piece of damage. Now, this is, in fact, economists are currently attacking this paper and trying to have it removed because they regard its damages prediction as being too high. And here is another survey was done of economists who specialize in climate change. There's about 2,500 of them out of about 100,000 academic economists. And they were asked about what's going to happen to global gross world product, the global equivalent of gross domestic product, if we head towards 7 degrees of warming in 2 centuries' time, so by 2220. And the average prediction they gave was that would cause a 25% fall in GDP. Now, again, that number sounds large, but what it's done, it's comparing a future level of GDP with global warming, which is hypothetical. This is the belief the economists have, to a future GDP without global warming, which is completely hypothetical because there's no such economy. It's a comparison of 2 hypothetical numbers. Now, when you convert it using that formula I showed above, you get that is a prediction that a trajectory towards 7 degrees of global warming by 2220 will reduce the rate of economic growth between now and 2220, the annual rate of economic growth, by just over 0.1%. Now, that is slightly more than the accuracy with which we can currently measure changes in GDP from one year to another. So it really is a trivial impact upon the economy. Whereas scientists, this is one of my favorite papers in this literature, defined more than 1.5 degrees of warming as dangerous, 3 degrees as catastrophic, and 5 degrees or more as unknown, implying existential threats. In other words, we might not exist certainly as a civilization, possibly as a species. So there's an enormous gap between climate scientists and economists on this front. And you might think, well, don't the economists read what the scientists write? Well, this is a paper by Tim Lenton, a research paper, a survey paper of experts in different tipping points in the climate in 2008. And I'll just go through it quickly here because I'm going to come back and highlight some elements of this when I finish putting the stating together. So that's Tim Lenton's statements. This is William Nordhaus talking about this specific research. He said there have been a few systematic surveys. A particularly interesting one is by Lenton. It finds no critical tipping elements with a time horizon of less than 3 centuries until temperatures have risen by at least 3 degrees Celsius. Now, and in the manual for DICE, he justifies using a damage function, which is basically damage equals a small constant multiplied by the temperature change squared, a quadratic. He says, I don't include sharp thresholds or tipping points, but this is consistent with the survey by Lenton. Now, that is absurd. This is completely contradictory. Lenton says we'll have a false sense of security with smooth projections. Here is Nordhaus using a quadratic. Lenton says a variety of tipping elements could reach their critical point within this century. He says none at all. And then within this century, according to Nordhaus, that's actually 3 centuries away. So that's not a summary, that's a complete contradiction. And this is typical of economists. And if a student of mine had submitted a paper like this, I would have failed him or her for bad work, very bad work. And this guy got the Nobel Prize instead for Economics of Climate Change in 2018. So we are going to face a tipping point, because there's absolutely no way the analysis which has dominated how politicians and the public react to climate change, no way that's accurate about what's coming our way. Rather than 3 centuries, I think we'll be lucky to have 3 decades before these damages start to turn up. And I want to give an analogy as to why we actually accept this stuff. Why do we not question it? And it's partially because we're all very comfortable with the amount of energy we consume these days, which is what's fundamentally the cause of global warming, burning fossil fuels for energy. You look at the lights behind me. If we go back simply a century, this would have been the luxury of a king. We all live like this these days. We enjoy the amount of energy we consume. And if we're told that there's no problem with continuing to consume that energy, then we fall into that trap. But what is going on with economists is they have made up these numbers by pretending that what happens with gross domestic product across the planet now, in data, we're currently data between 1960 and 2014, they say what the impact of temperature is on GDP at different temperatures across the globe today can be used to predict what's going to happen with climate change over time. And I'm writing a new book, which is the title, How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. I'm quite serious, they will. And I use an analogy in this book of, imagine you're blind and you're crossing terrain and it involves a gully and you can't see, so you ask a guide, how steep is the gully? And the guide says, oh, it's very gradual. It's only half a kilometre deep, 50 metres deep, and it takes half a kilometre to get to the bottom. No problem whatsoever. You take one step forward and crash into this gully, almost killing yourself. And then you ask a guide, how on earth did you make such a huge mistake? And the guide tells you, well, it was too difficult to survey the gully in the direction you're actually going. So rather than surveying it east to west, I surveyed it north to south. That's literally what they've done. And we fall for that because our knowledge of the impact of climate on incomes is what we experience as we travel around the planet, as we live in this particular point in time. And we know that there are civilizations which live at 5 degrees above zero or even less in the Arctic regions and 35 around the tropics. So a 30-degree range of temperature is quite manageable. And then when climate scientists say 2 degrees could kill us, we think, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. We fall for this because we're just like the blind person being guided by a stupid guide who doesn't want to do the hard work of working out what's going to happen in the direction you're actually going. So he surveys the opposite, the 90-degree angle to the way you're actually going. And this is known in mathematics as the fallacy of ergodicity. If you want to look that up, I recommend taking a look at it. There is absolutely false to believe that what applies to climate across space will be what happens through climate through time. And the simplest point here to make that point, there are no tipping points across space. We are going to strike tipping points through time, and the temperatures which we've already increased the global temperature by are likely to eliminate winter ice around the Arctic, Greenland, and the West Antarctic ice shelf. And possibly we could lose the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation during our lifetimes, which would mean that, according to some most recent research, temperatures in Europe would fall by 3 degrees per decade for 3 decades, which would make Europe uninhabitable because of cold, while the rest of the world would have a famine caused by the collapse of our agricultural systems. So economists have misled us completely. We've fallen for it because we like comforting information, comforting ideas to be put our way, but we are in a catastrophic breakdown, and we're going to experience the breakdown now before you're doing anything significant to stop it. So the question is not so much avoiding catastrophic change as how do we hang on to something resembling society as we go through that change. And I pessimistically believe we're likely to see the start of that process in the next decade.
Steve, thank you for that stark and account of where we are. I'll start with a question, perhaps get into more specific ones, or where we might some home answers for future changes. Steve, you were talking experts, in this case economists, producing types of knowledge which allow a system to carry on precisely as it is, despite it driving off a cliff. And I wonder if either of you wish to comment on the COP process. There's a question in the chat asking about the COP process, which in my view, if an alien came from space and looked at what we've 35, they would assume we hadn't been doing anything. But
I can maybe answer about the
yeah, Ilona, you take it away. Yeah.
So I don't know whether it's my internet, so James is it's James or it's me. I'm not sure. You can hear me well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought maybe it's my internet is too slow or something. Anyhow, no. So exactly. So I actually I've been to COP. I mean, it was my first COP, and I feel, you know, of course I avoid traveling, but this year there was we had some events that I was involved in. And I kind of and I also teach about the conference. I thought, okay, so I have a chance to go, and I got the badge, you know, for the conference. So so I went there, yeah, I was, I think, pretty naive, and I thought, well, you know, in some way it's nice, you know, because you have all those, you know, scientists and the decision makers there, but like the complex, the setup is just wrong, you know. So most of the time, actually, scientists, you know, talk to each other in those side events. In the side events, there are no decision makers, because the decision makers, the delegates, you know, from national states, they are busy with preparing for the meetings and negotiations. And I attended some negotiations, and they are like very detailed, and it's like a lot of, you know, legal language. But it's like a lot of, you know, wasted effort to, and like a lot of negotiations were about like really, you know, like really kind of, you know, I would say, even unimportant details. And if you think about important issues, yes, okay, there were some sessions about like indigenous rights, or I don't know, adaptation finance, and you know, various topics. But there was no single session about like the most important, that is, you know, phasing out fossil fuels. So I mean, it was quite bitter to be there and kind of to even listen to those opening speeches that, yes, you know, this conference will change a lot, and, you know, there was so much hope. And at the end, you know, no session about the most important issue, that is phasing out fossil fuels. And of course, it makes sense, because, you know, if you think about the setup of the process, like all national states would need to agree on having like a session on a certain topic, and the topic of the fossil fuel phase out is always blocked by countries like, or the delegates from the countries like Russia or the Arab states. So in somehow it's like logic within the process, but it's like, to me, it was yeah, like really, in some way, like really bitter, not to see that you know, there's like so many people are busy and talking and about, you know, important things, but like the most important thing was like that there's, you know, this elephant in the room that no one talks about it. So it was, you know, disappointing. And also the whole issue with indigenous people. Yes, so they were brought there by boats, and they were like kind of, you know, it was like in the media, the conference was advertised as the conference of indigenous people. And at the end, you know, like most of the indigenous people could not enter the blue zone where the negotiations were taking place. Most of them were in the green zone that was kind of open to the public. And they didn't have like a pavilion, they didn't have a space, so they were sitting on the floor, you know, like some were selling like some, you know, jewelry, making henna tattoos. And like, and I thought, you know, it was so embarrassing that they were, I think they were used in some way as tokens, you know, that, but at the end, no one kind of cared, they were not listened to, and they didn't have a place there. So was, but in some way, also as a scientist, I felt also in some way as a token there, you know, that all those scientists are brought there, but at the end, you know, they are given those special sessions where they are busy with each other, but it's like the decision makers were not, so it was my cat, decision makers were not there, and and they were not talking to the scientists or not. So overall, quite an abstract experience of the COP process. And I think the solution will not be there. Yes, so even more, I believe in the kind of like bottom-up action, in the action by citizens, also by some business. So some business is actually very progressive, but I think or maybe some more local, regional governments. They will be leading the action, but I think that the global problem will not be solved within this global COP process of the UNFCCC process, because I think it's like I don't see the way out there.
If I can make a comment, yeah, I haven't been a member of the COP process, and I refer to it as COP out. But I think one of the reasons it's failed to actually make any significant change to the amount of carbon dioxide we're pumping out into the atmosphere is that it was set up to fail, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Ilona, but one of the conditions is consensus. All parties have to agree. And of course, oil countries are not going to agree. Delegates who are representing effectively fossil fuel companies won't agree. And I think this is deliberate. If you take a look at how lobbyists work in Washington, one thing that they know is if you make something require international agreement, it won't happen. So I think in many ways COP was set up to fail, and we're now seeing the extreme levels of that, where a substantial proportion of the delegates are from fossil fuel companies. So rather than being a way of managing climate change, it's a way of making sure we don't manage climate change.
Thank you very much. Got another question from the chat. Matt Gilbert asks, is climate only one of the factors? Is the broader problem not ecological overshoot? And he says he's worried about energy returns on energy investment and agricultural yields. I think either one of you could.
I can start. I think it's exactly not only climate. There's the biodiversity crisis, or other aspects of planetary boundaries. It's bigger. I think climate is just like one of all the crises we are talking about. This is like one aspect, but it's probably the most global. And also something would affect also other areas, because like biodiversity is changing, also because climate is changing, and like many species are losing their habitats. So it's in some way all interconnected. And agricultural yields, it's a very relevant topic. Maybe we have some experts in agriculture, but what I really appreciate is kind of those ideas in the area of like regenerative agriculture, because I think the kind of industrial agriculture, as we mostly know it, it's actually producing food that is in some way poisonous. So it's like using more pesticides, and everything is kind of increasingly unhealthy. So you eat food that actually is not good for you. But there are those promising concepts, as I mentioned, regenerative agriculture, also kind of community-based agriculture, farmer consumer networks. So I think there are also some good examples how maybe a way out of the crisis could look like, but definitely not like this sort of like standard industrialized agriculture that we know that's kind of very vulnerable also to all kinds of diseases and pathogens.
From my point of view, I think we're lucky that it's global warming, which is the first of the many damages we're likely to confront as a serious challenge to our civilization. Because if it was biodiversity instead, that'd be it. There's no coming back from destroying the biodiversity on which our lives and the economy obviously depend. So if we didn't have global warming in our way, we'd probably find out that we've destroyed the biodiversity that makes our existence possible, and there'd be no way we can create biodiversity that we've currently destroyed. There is some possibility of reversing the temperature damage we're doing. And I'm involved with a group called MIR, which stands for Mirrors for Earth's Energy Rebalancing, which is proposing a way of using extremely cheap mirrors on the surface of the planet to reflect sunlight into outer space and therefore stop it becoming infrared and raising the temperature of the planet by being captured by carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. So if we do find ourselves suddenly realizing that this is a catastrophic threat to our existence, if it were biodiversity, that's it, it'd be all over. If there's global warming, it's possible to imagine that we could reduce the temperature of the planet by, say, 3 degrees, and we'd need to reduce it by more than we've increased it to reverse the momentum of the systems we've set up. That would, as it happens with MIRS technology, that would require mirrors on 3% of the Earth's surface. It's not exactly easy, but it's feasible. There are other ways in which you can take carbon dioxide out, not through machines, that is ridiculous, but things like phytoplankton transfers between above and below the thermocline layer, growing enormous amounts of bamboo, which sequestrates carbon very rapidly, sequestration using calcium carbonate. There's a range of techniques which are possible. I think we just simply have to gear up for them as fast as we can. And that's one reason I want to get funding to groups like MIR, because if we need to build these facilities after the damage starts to occur, it may well be too late. And I think we're not going to do anything serious about this until large numbers of white people start to die in America and Europe. And when we see enormous deaths there, say 10 to 100 times the scales of the deaths that have occurred in Thailand and Indonesia and Cambodia in the last couple of weeks with the floods there, when a couple of 100,000 white people die in America, maybe a couple of million, then we'll realize, holy shit, this is serious. Stop listening to the economists. What the hell can we do? Then there's a chance to reverse it. If it was biodiversity, it would all be over.
But maybe no, surely, like it's also, I think, it's important what kind of priorities are there, because currently what we observe actually, like even in the research, like academia, no, like actually we have problems with funding, because like a lot of public funding goes to the military now, you know, so there is money, but currently, you know, within national states, you know, like governments are investing in weapons, you know, and the army and you know, so science is suffering, but also like in some way, you know, there's also no the climate change or climate action is not the priority. Yes, so now the priority is security, and again, no investments in the weapons. So it's horrible.
It is horrible, and if we've got idiots in charge, let's be frank, people like Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, Donald Trump. I mean, these are idiots we need to give expert advice to. Now, what do experts do when you give them, idiots do when you give them expert advice? They stuff it up. That's what Boris Johnson did with COVID. We've now seen the report coming out recently about how absurd the policies of the UK government were, responsible for 20,000 more deaths than could necessarily have occurred with COVID. Having these fools in charge when we need to reverse the damage we've done to the planet is another reason why we're highly unlikely to do it at a global level. I think it's going to come down to which nations may be able to survive and which elements of humanity could survive. One of the groups I would back is New Guinea Highlanders. It's feasible to imagine humans continuing there because they're high enough above the equator, in altitude, not to have the same temperature rise as at the sea level, and they've had a hunter-gatherer history. They probably will survive. China might survive. I really don't think Europe or America is going to survive this in any form resembling the current nation states.
Yeah, that's maybe also one important aspect of the kind of what you think about functions of national states? Yes, so it's like providing, like, for healthcare, education system, some form of security system, like, you know, trade system, and so on. And I think what we'll be observing soon is like slowly, you know, or like a pension system also, like all those functionalities will not be able to maintain anymore. You know, so kind of national states will be kind of step by step. Stepping back, and we will have increasingly problems with maintaining those functionalities. Oh, we lost James. James is there.
No. You're back, James.
We
Are you
can't hear
muted,
you,
James?
Yeah. Am I? No, I should be.
Yeah, you're okay.
Oh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
You're audible.
I wanted to just pick up of these and possibilities, because you're both simultaneously laying out pretty bleak outlook and how things seem set to get much worse, but also lay out a whole number of technologies which you say, if implemented, would have a not painless but a relatively painless path out of these things. So I would just like to pick up on that contradiction. And one other thing, which is, Steve, you said that until there are major disasters in Europe and North America, the consciousness won't raise. I mean, we have seen in the flooding in Valencia, for example, led to a fall in concern about climate change in polling in Spain, as it was picked up by the far right and weaponized against climate action. Or you've seen similar things with the Palisades fires in California. So, what is the political or social technologies that we also need to turn events into action, and action that will make that future events less likely to happen?
I'm sorry, you, Ilona. Yeah.
Go on, Steve. I can start.
Okay. I still think my model for this in some sense is World War II, and the political belief to try to argue that we could appease Hitler. Okay, and there's only not one person, but only one prominent person making the case that was impossible before the fall of Poland, the fall of France, and Dunkirk, and that was Churchill, of course. Not that I'm praising Churchill to the high heavens here, but he was the one who was saying this is existential. We cannot have peace. We have to destroy this enemy, which ultimately happened. But only after 250,000 British troops facing extermination on the beaches of Dunkirk did the political will change. And then people started to say, what do we have to do to make it possible to put enough resources in to resist falling to Hitler? And that was where rationing came in, where people were lining up to contribute rather than trivializing it as was happened before Churchill. And that sense of urgency will only happen, I think, when we see truly catastrophic. And Valencia, yes, okay. These are regional things, and every bloody idiot on the internet will say, "Oh, that's just weather." We always have storms with hail, rivers of hail flowing down Milan in summer. That's quite common. They'll say bullshit, but they'll get away with it. If it's not particularly common to lose 50 million people to a drought or a famine, to have hundreds of thousands die through heat exhaustion. It'll take something like that before the stupidity is removed from the way we approach the problem. But then we have the problem, how do we get decent political decisions made with fools in charge? So that's why I think one of the only prospects, unfortunately, is to have people devoting money now to groups like Mir to start to build the facilities, to build things like factories to make mirrors that can pump out enough mirrors to cover 3% of the Earth's surface. That is a huge devotion of resources. We saw that in World War II. One reason the Americans were influential is they went from having almost no shipbuilding industry to being able to pump out a destroyer every 7 days, and the Liberty Ship program. Something of that scale is necessary to be able to fight this, and the decisions won't be taken to do that until we see it's either that or extinction.
Maybe just to add to this, I think the big problem currently is also inequalities, because some people can the most privileged, they can very easily escape. Like if there are some disasters, they have access to private jets. They have like multiple houses on different continents and so on. So I think that's a problem also, and the consumption patterns that the privileged practice, it kind of affects everyone else, and it has kind of this downstreaming effects that that we constantly want to consume more. We feel unhappy, and like we want to have like bigger cars, bigger apartments, and and travel more, and all this stuff. And I think I think technology is very important, but like changes in social norms are extremely important as well, and also changes in kind of what are the sources of like social status or prestige. Now, currently, like social status or prestige is linked a lot like with energy consumption or with goods and services that consume like a lot of energy. So like big cars and traveling a lot, big apartment, big houses, And I think it's we can change it in some way, or in some way, we are a part of this. So if you click like on social media because someone went for holidays, I don't know, to Egypt or somewhere, then it's somehow you're promoting those norms. So I think it's a question to ask, like, what kind of social norms, like, what do we promote? And maybe something what gives me some hope in my research on social tipping is that there's evidence that actually small groups, like small minorities of around like 20 to 30%, they can change the norms of the dominant or the dominant norms in the society. So like you don't need to change everyone, like you need just those small kind of content motivated groups, and they can lead to norm changes within the whole society, or kind of like establish like new dominant patterns, like in norms, but also in technology. It's actually similar. And actually, in some way, we even see it, but currently those minorities are on the kind of right-wing side, and they are, bringing all of this discussion about, migration and wars and conflicts and all this stuff. So I think it's also important to think about the groups or minorities, or how to connect people, how to support each other, and but in some way I think we don't need to change everyone. Like we have to focus on those small groups and ask how to help them to kind of to get more members and promote the norms that they are promoting.
Thank you. Got another question from the chat. Craig, I think in the UK, asks, how might demographic changes such as aging population growth, some populations reaching their peak, affect social collapse? And I would throw in ecological and economic collapse.
I can start. See if it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, of course, this is important because like you have an aging population in Europe or in the global north, and at the same time, aging population is also more vulnerable, but also acquires often like more energy. So kind of like for healthcare or for air conditioning if gets the weather gets not good and so on. But at the same time, you have like massive pressure of populations that are younger, like in the global south. And I think people are also, many young people were also frustrated that somehow, they realize. So maybe I give you an example. When I was like 20 years old, there was this sort of this narrative that kind of study well, like get good grades and work hard, you will get a good job, you will be fine. Maybe you won't be a millionaire, but you will be able to, I don't know, get some apartment or house, and you have good life, And now when I talk to young people, there's actually there's much less hope, and there's like this sort of recognition that you can have good grades, you can work hard, but in some way, you will not have a bright future, or it's actually the chances are not good, So I think this is also kind of adding the pressure, on the whole system, and maybe but one more example that it's not only aging and young, but first, like in my research on heat impacts, we show that pregnant women and small children actually also suffer heat waves and increase heat. And in many world regions, when it's very hot, there's an increasing risk of premature deliveries, and also so some children born too early, and also sorry, I have problems with my voice. And some children also born still, so they are born dead. So this is actually happening right now. Also, children below 5 years old are more affected by heat.
On demographics, one reality there is we have too many people on the planet. I'm not being racist in saying that. You can find that in the Limits to Growth study. The only scenario that Limits to Growth put forward in 1972 that led to a stable future involved freezing human population at about 1980 levels. Now, we've got about twice as many people on the planet as we had back then. But there's also this massively skewed distribution of income, and the ultra-rich, and not just the 1% globally, but the 1% in each nation, are responsible for a substantial proportion of energy consumption, and that's what's got to fall. So I can see as soon as we realise just how serious this is, we'd ban private jets, we'd eliminate tourism. The drastic moves like that are necessary. And the demographic change has to be downwards. We need less people on the planet. Again, just to give you an idea of how that applies, with the reason we have 8 billion people is because of the Haber-Bosch process, which enables to turn phosphate and oil into food. So we're actually eating oil. And the scale of the population, I have been told by scientists in this area, that we could support on the planet without the Haber-Bosch process is about 1 billion people. Now, that means we're dependent upon fossil fuels for food, and not let alone energy. So this is an absolute need to reduce the number of humans on the planet, and also to massively reduce the consumption. So rationing and things like that are going to be vital if we're going to survive this. And I think this has to be done on the national scale rather than international, because it's simply inconceivable to politically suggest that everybody in England, for example, should be on the same energy consumption level as the average person in India. That simply won't happen politically. Our societies will fall apart if we suggest it. So pressures to bring down energy consumption at the national level, I think, are absolutely vital. But also we have to accept there are too many people. Population growth should have stabilised back in 1975-80, as Limits to Growth argued. We didn't follow their advice, again, largely courtesy of economists. We have to make adjustments to reduce the load that humans, period, make on this planet.
But I sometimes say, no, we have too many rich people on the planet.
Oh yeah, that's a distribution of income as well.
That's the problem.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But that's not enough. I mean, you definitely start with giving everybody the same energy budget for a country. So that would mean that Richard Branson could consume as much energy as I can, and then just impose rationing of energy to reduce the load on the planet. The moves like this are going to be necessary to have any chance of surviving what's coming our way.
Just to, I mean, in terms of communicating it, and also to push back a little bit on the framing that there are too many people. I mean, if firstly the distribution of energy use is so stark, as you said, you know, there you can have. I don't have a figure to hand, but you know, the number of Nigerians versus the number of upper middle class US Americans, you know, is a very large thing. And in terms of food production, yes, that's the system that we currently use, and we produce more food than to feed. We could feed, I think, 10 or 11 billion people comfortably with the food that we currently produce, and yet almost 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night. So, you know, as well as, you know, looking at those things, the social distribution, the social system that we deploy.
I still think this is serious, James. I mean, I'm making the point, forget about what's politically correct. Mm-hmm. Forget about what is socially acceptable. We are facing an existential crisis. Unless we treat it that way and consider, obviously income distribution is a massively important part of it. Leveling that with the rationing of energy, like we used to ration goods and services during World War II, that's going to be vital, no argument. But we all have to say, even if we had an even distribution, 8 billion people is probably far too many for the planet to be able to support indefinitely. And we've got to think about other people. We've got to think about other life forms on this planet. We should be custodians of life on this planet, not exploiters of it, not destroyers of life. That's what we've been. Unless we have that change in orientation, so we see ourselves as custodians of life on the planet, then it's no longer debatable. I think we won't realise that it isn't debatable until such time as the climate starts making the argument with climate change deniers, not us.
Yeah, although no, my approach is that it's like I think it's about like 50% of the global like poorest population responsible only for around like I think I know historical 4% of global CO2 emissions. So if you look at not just CO2 emissions, it's really the problem of the kind of global kind of upper middle class and upper class or the very wealthy class. It's not the problem of the poorest people, So I also kind of I'm a bit critical about this overpopulation debate because it's poor people, they don't have such a big impact on the environment and they don't use so much energy. It's a problem of the wealthy, So again.
So we are rapidly approaching the hour, but we've covered some extremely serious and existential topics, and I wonder if you each want to leave our audience with either one thing or both of this, either one thing that gives you hope and one thing that you think they can do to contribute to a future where we don't just tinker our way around the edges and fall into social collapse.
Should I start? So in some way, I still have a lot of hope, and I see like all those positive examples in the sum that we've mentioned here during the discussion, and I think it's great work that what the David Graeber Institute is doing, kind of collecting the knowledge and evidence, sort of, how to produce food on. I know if you have limited space and energy access, like how can we live together, like how to construct houses, what kind of technologies exist there, what kind of norms. So I think collecting such examples and learning from them, it's extremely important. And I see, like, I know there are many negative issues happening, but at the same time there are lots of positive, inspirational case studies. So I think this gives me hope, and it's important to kind of systematically collect the knowledge on those and kind of learn also from each other. So great to be here, and I'm looking forward to next parts of this event.
Thank you, Ilona. Steve?
Yeah, from my point of view, we have to realise the momentum that climate change already has. We've already exceeded 1.5 degrees. That was supposed to be controlled by Paris. We're supposed to be trying to limit to warming to no more than 1.5 degrees by 2050. Pretty ahead of schedule on that warming. So the momentum we've put into the climate already, and we have to really condition ourselves. What do we do to try to reverse that momentum? That's one reason I support groups like MEAR. I think that's mweer.org. You can find their website that way. And we have to, we know our political leaders are not going to do it. This is one of the great tragedies of having idiots in control, narcissists and idiots. Unless, I think this has to come from people themselves, whether it's wealthy or whatever else, putting the resources in to start doing what we should have done 20 or 30 years ago. And that's getting ready to attenuate the damage we've done to the global temperatures already. So join groups like MEAR, start working out programs about how you might in your own country bring about a redistribution of energy usage. What industries would you shut down to try to reduce the consumption? One of the obvious ones to me is Bitcoin goes. So would international tourism, anything you can drastically reduce energy consumption with now. Start working on national programs for survival and for reversing the momentum we put into the climate that otherwise will lead to certainly the destruction of human civilization and possibly a global extinction event on the scale of previous global extinctions, where often 85% of species went extinct. There's no way we can survive that. There's no way we should allow it, because we're supposed to be the intelligent species on this planet, and we're certainly not acting like it.
Well, what a note to end with, and let's start acting like that indeed. Well, thank you so much, Steve Keen and Ilona Otto. And as Ilona said, this talk is part of a series. There's another one tomorrow at the same time that you picked this one up, 6 p.m. GMT, whatever time that is, wherever you are, where Michael Hudson will be carrying on this theme, talking about the end of capitalism as we know it and its relationship to colonialism. And then on Thursday at the same time, please join us for the Survival Kit collection in St. Vincent with Andres Brinkmans, who's here in St. Vincent talking about the installation of the 3D printer alongside the Klovenuk Centre for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Two of their people are here with us who've installed a 3D printer in the prison alongside a spirulina farm. So if you want to join that Zoom, please email info@davidgraeber.institute to be sent the link and join that discussion. And details of the Michael Hudson talk are on the website davidgraeber.institute. And with that, thank you very much to our speakers, Ilona Otto and Steve Keen. And thank you so much for joining and for your questions in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, bye all.